and welcome to Women Who Lead, a podcast where I interview interesting and remarkable women from around the world on what it takes to be successful in career and life. My name is Jess Carr, a mother, leader in the corporate world, and the breadwinner in my family. Join me as I discover firsthand how to live a fulfilling, balanced life and be happy, healthy, and successful. My guest today is Carol-Anne Pickvance. Hailing from Brisbane, Australia, Carol-Anne is an artist, workplace and business strategist. Throughout her career, she has held many leadership positions, including recently as the head of strategy for a design firm in Asia Pacific. Carol-Anne currently resides in Australia and is off on a creative sabbatical with her husband. Listen in as we discuss the benefits of taking a career break and how to prepare for it, the importance of owning your own calendar, and how our definitions of success change over time. Welcome to the show, Carol-Anne. It's very, very nice to have you here. So just to get started, I'd just like to ask you if you could give a bit of a history about who you are and your journey.
Sure.
and where you are now.
Sure, thanks. So I find myself in the position of being quite a specialist. So being a design strategist, primarily in the workplace strategy and change management area, which basically means that I work with large-scale corporate leadership teams to help them prepare for a new workplace. It's not something that I dreamt of doing when I left university, because my first degree, in fact, was a drama degree, and I wanted to do set design. So I worked in set design for a little while. And I really enjoyed the creativity of working in that field and working with really interesting, dynamic people, actually. But what I didn't like about it is the temporary process. So you would go to all this trouble to do a design, and it would be, the show would last for the season, and then it would be pulled down, put in props boxes, and the stage would be painted black, and you'd move on to the next show. And I remember after one time in particular, I had hand painted this stage floor, and I'd really, really enjoyed doing it, and I was really happy with how it turned out. And then I'm like, I don't know, 2 months, 3 months later, I'm like rolling black paint over it going, I gotta get me a more long-term career. This isn't
Something a little bit more permanent.
Yeah. So I went back to university when I was 25, I think, and did interior design, which was brilliant because it was the same sort of three-dimensional design, but it was a lot more. I could just relax into doing the work and not constantly finding the next job, the next project, the next show. So I suppose going from my early careers as an interior designer, I started to sort of follow the aspects of that profession that I found particularly interesting and really kind of unexpected, actually. And that was everything to do with the human behavior and people's interaction with the environment, with the built environment in particular, how it can influence your experience, how it can change the way people move about the space, obviously, but also how they interact, how they think and feel often, how creative or innovative they can be, their capacity for learning, all those kind of invisible aspects. So I really started to kind of hone in on those, and that's kind of how I got to where I am. So it's been a long, slow evolution, I suppose, to get here. And in the course of that process, so much has changed in the sense that the longer I was in this career, the more I would move towards dealing with people. So more of the client side, relationship management, managing the design teams, and sort of incrementally moving away from the act of creative interior design, which I didn't mind because, like I said, I was following the aspects of that I thoroughly enjoyed. But it meant that I was starting to miss out on or lose sight of the creativity, the pure creation side of design.
So can I just ask that? So you're talking a little bit about your journey, I guess, of how like you went into the workforce. You were doing something that I guess you enjoyed, but had a bit of a too temporary kind of a feel to it. So then you've wanted to create something that's a little bit more permanent. You've gone then into the other roles then where you can really get into the deep work of it and you're in the doing mode of things. Then as your career's progressed, you've then gone up into more management, kind of away from that actual creativity. Can you just talk a little bit about what that transition's like, in the sense that, is it because you got to a certain level that you realized your skills had to change, and that you didn't want to but had to? Or can you just talk a little bit about how those skills had to evolve?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because I think that most leaders will find themselves in this position that they have been very good at their technical job, let's say, and as a result have perhaps been promoted to take on and lead bigger projects with more people, and then next thing you know, you're actually a people manager and not a technical doer anymore. Some are better at it than others. I remember it coincided with a point when I decided to change jobs, because I found myself in one position that I wasn't sure I wanted to be in anymore. And so I found myself in a leadership position of managing peoples and teams, and I decided, hang on a minute, I've moved too far away from delivering project work, which I was still very, at that point in time, passionate about. It also coincided with a change of other side of the planet kind of move, move from London back to Australia. And I thought, no, actually, I wanted to get back into project work. So I did. But then again, over the years, I've started to realize, no, actually, particularly lately, I feel like I can see the benefit in learning more about the people management side, and have really enjoyed kind of pursuing that in more detail. But it is a totally different skill set. You're absolutely right. So it's a constant learning. I'm constantly reading. Hence my book collection.
It's a beautiful book collection. And so I know that you have worked around the world. Can you just give us a little bit of a synopsis of the places you have worked, and I
Sure.
guess and I guess just a little bit about, were those opportunities things that you sought out, or were they opportunities that found you?
Okay, that's brilliant. Opportunities I sought out versus found. This is the choice between those two has really driven my life, and as of right now, I'm making a decision based primarily on looking for an opportunity as opposed to just falling from one to the next. So I guess, I grew up in Brisbane. I spent my early career working there, and both my parents were born overseas, and so I'd travel a lot as a kid, and I aspired to get overseas as soon as I go to London. I met my husband, who just happened to be English and who'd only been in Australia for, I don't know, I can't remember, like 10, 12 years or so. And so he wasn't that keen about going back to the UK, but bless him, he came with me. And so 3 months turned into 2 years. And I was working in London. And that's when I started to work in workplace for the first time, actually. So I guess I was more or less early mid-career by that stage. Then we decided, mainly from my husband's profession, he's a composer in film and TV, and he was struggling to. All his contacts were still in Australia, and we were in England, and he didn't have many contacts there, and he was still really trying to get into that process. But we decided it was time to go back to Australia for a while, so we went back. Well, we went to Melbourne then for 2 years, and during that time, an opportunity for him came up with a composer in residency with the BBC, and so he decided to go for it and was successful, so we were able to move back to the UK. And so then we spent another 5 years there, and for me, I was really keen to go back, because I kind of had begrudgingly moved back to Australia because my time wasn't done yet in terms of how I felt about that. And working in London for those 5 years, I was really fortunate in terms of the firm I was working with in particular just seemed to have really good global clients. So I would be working everywhere from Dubai to New York and across all of Europe. And that was a really steep learning curve, really steep. And that had all sort of happened serendipitously, those kind of career decisions. We're making life decisions about where we wanted to live, and as a result, looking for work in that location. Moving back to Australia, I was a bit nervous because having worked in London, which to me felt like the center of the universe because all HQ of global organizations seemed to be, to me, either out of London or New York, and they were 5 hours apart by flight. So who was going to work for in Australia? But actually they were unfounded fears. When I got back, I found that there's a whole thriving economy here and lots of large-scale corporations doing interesting stuff anyway. So it turned out for the best in that regards. But when I made that transition coming back, that was really one of the things where I thought, okay, I'm going to look for something specific. And I like to whiteboard things, and so what we ended up doing is getting a load of post-it notes and just doing the what is it about my career that I love, and I broke it down into every little aspect of it, the brand recognition, the workplace, the type of people, the type of clients it attracts, the type of projects that you'd be working on, its locations around the world, it's the remuneration package potential, all the different aspects that I could think of. And then I ranked them into order in terms of my personal priorities about what did I think was the most important over one thing over the next. And then I looked at particular organisations that I was really interested to explore working with, so that I had a sort of a short list of the people that I then contacted, and was lucky enough to get an offer through that kind of process. But then it was a great way to evaluate. I had two offers in a way, because the company that I had left was asking me to consider working with them in Australia. So yeah, long story short, that's kind of how I made that decision right then and there. Interestingly, I had decided to work for a design firm as opposed to a firm that was both workplace strategy or purely workplace or design strategy, really, because I felt there was this really important connection between those two pieces of thinking, and without going into the kind of technical detail of it. So I kind of made a decision based on, in many ways, what my younger self would have thought of as being successful. And then, interestingly, as I got to that role, I thought, actually, this isn't where I should be. I should be doing something a little bit differently. And then an opportunity came up to that I felt that's much more aligned with this opportunity to play more of a strategic role within a design firm. And so I ended up taking that opportunity and pursuing it for 5 years or so.
So that would have been around the time that we met, right? So we met in 2012.
Absolutely. Yeah, right. So I think we were both new to Sydney, weren't we, at that point?
Yeah,
exactly.
That was around 2012. So just with all of those moves that you were doing from Australia over to London, at what sort of stage, you were saying, is it your mid-level career that you were moving over to London? Just if you can go back to that kind of mind state, what was going through your mind when you were thinking about that journey that was going to come? Like, was it apprehension? Was it just excitement? Where were you at?
Yeah. So we have taken, as a result of that move of going from Brisbane, my hometown, born and bred, only visited other places, never lived anywhere else, to moving to London. That was a really conscious decision that I had been longing for I think most of my, maybe even in high school. Like, seriously, it was this goal that I'd had for years before we actually moved there. And I think I was 26 perhaps when we did that, 25, 26. It was more big picture life experience that I was after, rather than thinking about the career specifically. I felt, I've got a career, I've got a few years experience. I think I had 5 or so years experience. I'm sure I can get a job. The cockiness of youth. Anyway, but we did a 5-month holiday, or, I'm going to say it was backpacking, but, it wasn't the same sort of backpacking our friends had done. We had our standards, and the standards were it had to at least be a 1-star hotel, and we weren't sharing bathrooms.
You were
So
traveling with, was it your husband at the time?
yeah, David and I, and we were nearly married at that stage. Yeah, nearly married. And so, yeah, so that was fun. So, but in those 5 months of travel, we learned so much about each other, about, managing our finances, around the pursuit of experiences and how important that was to us. And, I'd always just been creative and a sketcher and a drawer, and I just fell in love with all of the art galleries and the history that we saw. And so we just had this incredible time. And then when it was time to start working again back in London, when we got to London, I was so ready for it. I was really ready and raring to go. It took, it felt like forever, but it took about 2 or 3 weeks to finally land a job in this new town. Yeah, but that sort of worked out. Interestingly, I threw myself into my career in London in particular because it was absolutely fascinating. This is where I'd learned about this thing about workplace strategy in the first place, and being surrounded by incredibly talented and experienced people in this field. I was just having this real career renaissance, let's say. I just felt like I was at university all over again, learning this whole nother language that I was like, why wasn't I taught this at uni? It was a really exciting experience. But one of the things I learned about myself is that I'm all in when it comes to the career. And so I would be, working long days, late nights, often on weekends. And it was very hard I didn't even think about what this whole work-life balance meant in those years. And I remember one day in particular where it was a weekend. My husband said 2 things to me in those years that have stuck with me and really resonated. And one of them was, you come home tired, I just get the dregs. You put all your energy and effort into your career. And I'm like, oh my God, he's right. I really do. I was prioritizing my career over our relationship, over my relationship with my family, over my health. I wouldn't go to a doctor unless it was, mission critical, that I couldn't get on with whatever it was I was doing. And I'm sort of realized at that point in time that this is not right. You can't live your life like this.
So do you think that, like, I know that happens to a lot of women. It happens to me as well, and particularly, ambitious go-getters like ourselves. But I'm just really kind of, in terms of your motivations, was it that you felt like you were being, I guess, pushed, that you needed to know as much as you possibly could, or was it you were actually being pulled into all of that and then not being able to pull yourself out of it?
If I'd answered that question at the time, I would have a different answer to looking back on it 15 years later. At the time, I would have felt I was being swept along in it and I didn't really have a choice. But the way I can look back on that time now is we each have a responsibility to ourselves to manage our own work-life balance. Nobody will do that for you. No employer, no partner, no. This is my personal responsibility to manage my work-life balance. I have had to learn over the years to find the boundaries of when I will and will not work, when I am and am not going to be on, when I will and won't receive calls or deal with emails. I have to find my own boundaries. When I look back over the course of my career, and I haven't worked in loads of different places, but I look back at them and I think I am the common denominator between each one of those companies. I'm the common denominator about how I have felt pushed to that limit. And it's how I have come to realize that for me personally, and I would say for my husband, for us, taking a career break in chunks of time is a really important way for us to hit the circuit breaker and go, hang on a minute, what's really important? And so, as I mentioned, that when we moved from Brisbane to London for the first time, we took 5 months of travel before we, got south of London. And then we did it again on the return journey. So leaving London, coming back to Sydney, we took another chunk of time. And then, so that's about a 5-6 year break between working and then doing it 5-6 years later. And then again in 2014, so I guess that was another 4 years later, we took 6 months off. That one was a really interesting one because that was a career break. I was employed and they were so good as to say, yes, I could take 6 months of unpaid leave. So I knew I had a job to return to, which was, really, really helpful. And what was most interesting for me then is having basically for 5.5 months we traveled around the world, which was what an incredible experience. And then when we came back, I had about 6 weeks where I knew I was not, where we'd be in Sydney before I would return to work, and I started to learn oil painting and really kind of had a real passion for it, and did this really quick learning curve and enjoyed trying to work through what does that mean, and where can I take this? So much so that when I returned to work, I actually asked if I could work 4 days a week instead of 5 days a week, so that on the 5th day I could paint. And when I returned to work after that break, I'm going to use the word shocked. I was shocked at how much stress was in everybody in the team. And again, this is no reflection on that particular organisation. That's just life working in an interior design firm, a creative profession working within a finite time frame. It's everybody just wants to do their best work and to do really well, and just we're not alone in how we throw ourselves into our careers. Lots of people do it, but I could see that level of stress because I was suddenly realizing what it felt like to be without that stress and in a workplace. And I made a promise to myself, I have to remember this feeling, I have to hold on to this and protect this, and still do the best that I can do, as I always have in my career, but at the same time managing those boundaries between work-life balance more. And so the way I managed that is I said, okay, between Monday and Thursday I'll work as I always have, meaning I'll work late, I'll work through lunch, I'll work early, whatever it takes. But Friday I'm going to paint, and I'm going to try very hard not to work on the weekends. Inevitably Sunday afternoon would come by and I'd go, I just would feel better about Monday if I dealt with some stuff right now, and would do it. So finding that boundary.
So sorry, keep going.
So that was 2014, and now here we are in 2020, and I find myself in a similar position, and now I know it's time for a career when I love my career, but sometimes I get to a point where actually I suddenly realize I don't really love it that much anymore. Somebody will send me a really interesting article that I would normally go, oh wow, that's fascinating, I'm going to read that, and when I get those articles now and I'm like, I don't let me get back to Instagram, then I know it's probably time. And it's about that feeling of being constantly on, always on, head racing, you're running from one thing to the next, one idea to the next, and just needing to take a moment. And then I found a quote from a woman whose name escapes me, Diane Ackerman, an American poet, and her quote says something along the lines of, I don't want to get to the end of my life and feel like that I've lived just the length of it. I want to have lived the breadth of it as well.
Oh,
and
that's
that
beautiful.
just really resonated with me. I was like, yeah, right. Like, I love my career, but it isn't everything in life. And so as a result, last week was my last week. I resigned from my job, and I'm going to take I'm a bit nervous to say it out loud, but I'm taking a 12-month break where I'm calling it a creative sabbatical, where I have a series of personal creative projects that I really want to work on, and painting is one of them. Learning to ride my great big mountain bike is another one. But also to have in the back of my mind a bit of a rumination about, well, what's next for my career? What does it look like? Not just sort of falling from one opportunity to the next opportunity, but really consciously sit down and go, okay, I'm 48. I've got, I don't know, what, 10, 15 years of work life or less if I can figure out a way. And that's going to take drive and energy and commitment and passion and enthusiasm. And I think in order to do that, I need to take these kind of incremental periods of time to sustain, to refill those inspiration tanks.
So I guess with all of these things where you're looking back on them in hindsight, it's it's quite nice to put together a story of every couple of 4 or 5 years that it is that you take these mini retirements almost in a way. But can you explain sort of maybe what the drivers at the time and what you might have been going through at the time? Like what at each of those moments, what drove you to say, enough, I need to take a break?
Okay. So the second one was probably the one that had the biggest driver. So the first one was like, let's go see the world. So that was just all about excitement. But the second one was, we've been in London. Like I say, I was thoroughly enjoying my career, but I was really deep in it, and I was doing heaps of travel. So I would be traveling all the time. I wouldn't see my husband a whole lot because of all of this travel. It would be highly stressful because traveling in foreign countries, foreign languages, while you're trying to get stuff done on a plane and go through customs, and it sounds glamorous, it really isn't. So don't get me wrong, there's some perks, of course, but it's exhausting. Time differences. I remember things like my inbox would be, working in London, having jobs in Dubai and New York. I can't remember the time differences now. I think one's 5 hours behind and one 5 hours ahead. So you've got sort of 2 days worth of emails in your inbox when you came in the morning. It's like really an overwhelming amount of information and just constantly on the go. One day I was walking down a street with my husband, and it was BlackBerry, that's how long ago it was, and I had an email on my BlackBerry, and I stopped in my tracks, and I can't even remember what it was about now, but I remember shouting at my BlackBerry, what the heck? And my husband says to me, Carol, this is not stress, this is distress. Like, you've got to quit your job, you can't go on like this. And I think, it was that moment of realization that, I don't know how old would I have been in those days, like in my early 30s, and I was like, I can't do this for 20 years, 25 years. This is ridiculous. And so I don't know, it's just a trigger point. For me, it was, a couple of things my husband has said to point out that this isn't right. That kind of triggered it.
You often can't see it when you're in it. You often can't see.
That's right. And it's, as I say, it's only as I've gotten into my 40s that I've been able to recognize the signs. And I think it's because I've learned what it feels like to have, imagine your life right now with the absence of stress. Like, it's a hard thing to do. For me, it was like, I have my husband whom I love dearly. I have, an apartment that we live in. I have a career that I enjoy. I have my health. I have all that, and I don't have stress. It was the strangest feeling, and it's addictive. I don't know how long it's sustainable for. Like, perhaps it's unrealistic to think you can live your life like that and still be career-minded and driven. Okay, so then another thing I've done in my past is I did a job that was client-side, so not consulting. And I did that because I thought this will give me the headspace to paint on Fridays, because it was effectively a 9-to-5 job. It was very close to a 9-to-5 job. And honestly, it was only maybe 4 or 5 months into it before I realized this is not sustaining my need for, what is it? Is it energy and action, I suppose, of the career. You know, the things were missing were things like, you know, pitching and winning. That's always a high, but client relationships and meeting lots of different people with lots of different problems to solve. That solving big complicated projects or problems were the things that I really thrived on. And then finding myself in a role where it was somewhat repetitive because it was doing the same thing, the same problem to lots of similar groups, so that there wasn't a great deal of variety in what we were actually doing, that I realized, no, actually it's too soon to semi-retire, I suppose. And so went back into consultancy work.
So do you think it's a nature of the industry and the type of work that you do, or do you think with who you are as a person that it wouldn't matter the type of work that you go into, that you would have this tendency to throw yourself into your work?
It's probably a combination of the both, the combination of the two. You know, as I said, working in our industry, so doing commercial interior design means a creative process in a fixed time frame, and the creative process isn't fixed, is it? Like sometimes you can just get it, sometimes you just can't.
Yeah, I have to say it's actually one of the reasons that I moved quite early on out of the interior design industry, was because of the pressure of trying to be creative within that finite time frame. It was too much for me. I needed to go find other things that I found interesting and creative in a different way, because for me that stress was too much. And I never burnt out from that. I burnt out from other things throughout my journey. But yeah, it is. I know that industry is quite is particularly tough.
Yeah, it is. It is. But I think so too would be, you know, advertising, any kind of creative agency that's trying to do a creative process in a tight time frame. It's also very, certainly large scale corporate workplace. You can also get very complex. You know, it's complex in terms of the governance structure that you have to work within. So who's making decisions, who's involved, and all those kind of things. So, but equally, I find that really fascinating and interesting in terms of navigating that kind of landscape. So I think it's a combination of who I am, and as I say, I've come to learn to recognize that I find it very difficult not to be all in. I can't just sort of loosely participate. I have to be a part of it.
You've been talking about, you know, each of these kinds of sabbaticals that are coming up, and then wanting to kind of hold on to that sense of maybe freedom of mind or whatever it might be, that you don't let the stress get to you when you do come back into the workforce. And I guess you're coming back in with a renewed sense of enthusiasm too, because you're not bogged down by the day-to-day kind of stress. But do you have I don't know, any kind of rituals or like daily things that you've done, or any tools that you've put in place to try and help you manage that?
Yeah. So look, it's how do I phrase this? Running has changed my life. I only really found running maybe 3 years ago now. And look, I knew intellectually exercise is good for you, and exercise will, you know, it's good to de-stress. You know, sure, I knew that. But until you feel the chemicals in my own body, that I suddenly was addicted. And so now I find that, look, physical activity generally, I found to be incredibly important for my ability to manage stress. It's like a period of time where, when I first started, I couldn't think about anything else other than trying to stay alive, trying to breathe. And then as I got fitter, you know, my mind could just wander, but I wouldn't let it wander on work topics. I would just, you know, think about painting or holidays or, you know, stuff that makes me feel good, listen to the music, but just not be thinking about work for that period of time. So that's something that's been super important. I think the other thing in terms of recognizing the signs of when stress is coming in to be too much. Another one for me personally is my ability to paint, in the sense of having the right energy to do it. I describe it as kind of a band. I think if I'm too relaxed or too lethargic, I don't have enough energy to paint. If I'm too wound up or stressed out, I don't have enough paint to paint. And I've got to work on what's left in the middle. And as this band gets narrower and narrower and narrower, I know I need to, hit the circuit breaker and try and do something again, because I'm painting less because I'm either too stressed out or too exhausted to do it. So yeah, I think that would be one of the things I would tell myself if I could go back, is learn to recognize the signs in yourself that mean it's time to pay attention to the other aspects of your life besides your career.
And I guess, looking at these different mini sabbaticals, and knowing that, a couple were off, going to a new job or coming off moving back to Australia. What about some of the practicalities around having to prepare for these?
Yeah. Well, you definitely need to prepare for them. To maintain a healthy relationship, you need to prepare for them.
You can't just throw your hands up in the air one day and go, right, that's it, I quit my job.
Well, yeah. So these are things we've learned over the time. The first time when we were just like, I just want to see the world. I wanted to do this in 2000. It was my milestone year. And I remember my husband ringing me up. I was at work and he says, Carol, we just don't have the money to go for a year. We could go for a 2-month holiday, but we just can't afford it. And it's the first time I kind of heard him say that, like he'd been worried about the money, but I hadn't really paid attention. And so I realized, okay, this is it. We can't go yet. I sobbed all the way home in the car. But then I was like, okay, that's it. We're 12 months. We got an action plan to save, and we saved like crazy people. We were so frugal for that year, and we managed to do it. This time around, it's much more complicated because we have a number of mortgages and commitments to make, and so again, so when the 2014, 2015, when we got back to work, then 2015, we were like, okay, 5 years and we'll go again. And so in that 5-year period of time, we have, just sort of kept some money aside for it, just kept it in mind. Nothing serious, but just like chipping away at it. But then 2019 was the 5-year mark, and it just so happened that I was working on a particular project that I found thoroughly interesting, and it was a big, complicated thing, and I was really, really enjoying it. And so I was like, I'm not ready to go yet, so let's kind of hold on. And then 2020 happened. And let's face it, none of us have had fun in 2020. And it's been hard, long days, high stress, a lot of accountability and weight on my shoulders, that I was like, okay, yeah, now it's time. And so we have done a few things. We've talked to the bank and restructured our mortgages and in such a way that would help us manage this. It was a tough decision to resign from my job rather than ask for time off. And this is something I've never done before, as consciously, is to resign and say, I want to take a period of time that's more or less undefined. I mean, I'm saying a year, but I don't want to put an actual timeframe boundary to it yet. Yes, we'll have a financial boundary, of course. But in terms of time frame, if I find after 8 months, I'm ready to go back to work, well, then I'm going to go back to work. However, if I find after 12 months there's a project that I want to get started and I'm ready to start it, then maybe what I'll do is that. I'm sort of toying around with the idea of maybe writing a book, and if I get myself ready to ramped up to do it, then I might just keep going. But that's what I want to do, is just be much more undefined about it.
But you've put in place the preparation to be able to go into that without stress.
Yeah, hopefully. That's
hopefully.
exactly right. Hopefully, yeah. Yeah.
So I guess, I mean, this has been quite a unique year. So
Yeah.
it's now November of 2020, and you're in Australia, which has had a number of waves of the COVID cases. And in your previous organisation, like a lot of organisations, there potentially some pay cuts and restructuring that may needed to happen. What was the kind of I guess the stress of that and how you feel about that, the effect of that on your career, on others' careers, and just sort of how you're feeling about all of that.
Yeah, it's a really, really tough one. Being in a position of leadership, I feel a responsibility to the people, my colleagues, my peers, everybody in the organization. And so as a result, you can't help but not be affected by everybody's circumstances, because everybody has a different circumstance. Some are, I guess, more financially stable than others and have more or less commitments than others, but you can't help but not feel the weight of it. But I guess we were in a really lucky situation in the sense that we'd gone through quite a big organisational transformation the year before. So we were in the best possible situation we could be to face a really tough year. So thankfully that had happened. So I think we managed to get through it quite well, even though it was a really tough thing. So for me, that comes back to that idea of being a people manager, being a different set of skills. I have had an incredible learning curve this year because, as an economy rapidly shuts down, that makes the whole equation between finding work, running projects profitably, having a super operationally efficient business, that equation is something that you have to pay a whole lot of attention to in really difficult times. So that was a really interesting and exciting learning curve. We were making very rapid decisions. It was a constantly moving landscape. It meant that we were speaking to each other as a leadership team far more than we ever had in the past, and managed to navigate those waters pretty well. But it was intense. And I found myself working more and more and more because you feel the what's the word, you feel the if I've got a submission to do, I want to do the very best I possibly can, because I know what it means to, how it's going to help us if we win it and what it means if we don't. So you really put effort and energy into, maybe it's me putting more pressure on myself to perform at my best at all times, is perhaps the way I would describe what 2020 looks like.
But do you think, I mean, for you personally, did your work hours continue to blur even further?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Okay, I had some real positives and some tougher things. The real positives were I was at home full time with my husband. So after traveling, I don't think I had 2 or 3 days in a row, work days in a row in Sydney in the start of 2020. It was all over the place. And as I mentioned, my husband's a composer. His studio is here at home. So I would just never see him. And then in March, our organisation hit a no fly policy before the Australian lockdown happened, which was kind of good for me timing wise. I was literally just about to run down to Melbourne to interview a leadership team, and so instead of going, I did that from home via Teams. And actually, it was a really fun experience because like now we're in each other's homes visiting each other. I got to meet them, their kids, a pet. One lady was outside in the garden, another one sort of got his kids in the background on the couch. It was great. I got to see a more personal side to them. So working from home, I loved because I wasn't traveling all the time. However, it can be exhausting because you don't have that interstitial time in between one meeting and the next, where you work, in the office I might walk from one meeting room to another meeting room in between, or you might pop out and get coffee and you do a walking meeting while you're doing it. When it's Teams or Zoom or whatever, it's like one after the other with no time in between to do a mindset shift until I started to schedule a 15-minute break in between every single meeting so that I had a moment to just reset, get a glass of water, go to the bathroom, whatever it was, just a moment, step outside on the balcony and breathe some fresh air. So
And so
that level of intensity.
how did you manage that? So, because I mean, I know that's a thing that we all kind of struggle with, and particularly this thing of like people just schedule stuff in your calendar, and you're like, hang on a second.
Yes, but
So how
remember
did
how
you
I
deal with
said
that?
I am personally responsible for my own work-life balance. I own my calendar.
Mm,
So if you schedule me a meeting that I know it's an important one, I will stick a 15 or a half hour, depending, um, placeholder immediately afterwards and just call it overrun.
mm,
And I would do that because when I was in, working in real life mode, I would put a 30-minute travel time between each meeting because I usually was traveling, office to office, building to building, or floor to floor. So you can't just sandwich them up back to each other.
mm.
So I just swapped travel time for overrun time, which is really just a headspace time. So that was really important. The other thing was I always scheduled a meeting in my diary that was between 4:30 and 5:30 because that worked for the daylight hours here, that I would go for a walk or a run so that I could just have that
Have some
time.
time.
Yeah. And also all of our non-client meetings. So if I was doing, the leadership team meeting or a marketing meeting, a sales meeting, I could often do them as walking meetings. And so I would, have my headphones in and I'd either take my iPad if I knew I needed to look at content on screen, and just rather than doing a long walk, I would have just there's like a little park reserve right outside the front of our building, and I would just walk a loop so I don't get lost and I'm not far from home.
Mm.
Like if I had to go and, change devices for whatever reason, I could do it within minutes. And those sort of things really, really helped. But it's a recognition that you need a moment's pause, or just to change the speed or the thing that you're talking about in between one meeting and after the next.
Mm, mm.
And owning your diary, own your own diary.
Yeah, no, I think I agree that that's really, really important. I mean, I know that at the moment I'm doing a lot of work globally. So
Yes,
my nights are
time
being
difference.
overrun. And I'm even having, I've been very quite vocal at the moment about that I have a 2 nights a week rule where I'll only work late 2 nights a week, and I'm trying to keep it to that. Having said that, the last 2 weeks we've had massive bids on that we have to talk to each
Yeah.
other every night. And so I do have to make allowances for that, but definitely trying to put those boundaries around it.
Are
For
you
you,
able to make those allowances in the morning? Can you start? Because what I would find with my experience in the UK is I'd try and work the time frame hours that you're working with, even though you're living in different time zone. Does that help?
yeah, I mean, it does in theory, but in reality, I've got a young family at home. And so,
Yeah.
the kids go off, I get the kids off to school at 8 in the morning. So I'm ready to sit down and start doing work. And I think better in the morning. And honestly, I
Oh
think
yeah.
much more
Yeah.
creatively, much more clearly in the morning.
Yeah.
And I work in Asia Pacific, right? So I should be working on the Asia Pacific time zone. But then come the 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the kids start getting home. It's fine in my environment because I've got the separate study. I can sit in here
Mm.
and do my calls with Europe. But but I have between 6:30 and 7:30, I definitely need to get off the phone because kids need to be bathed. We need to eat dinner.
Yeah.
We need to have a little
Yeah.
bit of time before then I can get back on at calls. And I guess this brings me to a big question. There's a that I've read. So doing women in leadership kinds of um, uh, group work, through the organizations that I've been a part of. There was something that stuck with me in one of them, which was in order to be successful in your career, and in order to kind of make it, the hours are long and the work is hard. And so you either switch off at 5 and you give up a few years of your career while your kids are young, or you switch off and then you switch back on later to continue doing emails. Now, I mean, I understand when I've got calls and I've got to connect with the rest of the world, but I don't necessarily believe that about needing to do that all the time to be successful. So what's your take on that?
Oh, look, this is a really tough one, isn't it? I would like to think that attitudes towards that are shifting with the different generations have a different view on that. I think that what you've just described is classic Gen X thinking. I would like to think that, in particular, after the back of the pandemic and this, global forced working from home experiment that we're going through, is that people are a lot more receptive to the idea that we have lives that we have to fit in and around work, and it shouldn't be either or, it needs to be both. Again, it comes back to I want to own the responsibility of my own work-life balance. So I will need to manage when it is and it isn't okay to work long hours. Yeah, the work's hard. I mean, that's the thing. If you're doing a job that you enjoy, it's more of a vocation, and it's not hard work in that regards. It's intense work. But the long hours piece, I think we need to own that. And nobody's going to do it but you. You have to, we have to make our own personal choices in that regards. If I look back on 2020, I made some personal choices about, late night calls and, conversation. Australia's time zone just is not compatible with Europe at all. And so, of course, whenever we do any kind of pitching or conversations with Europe, it's an unsociable hour, to say the least. So then it comes down to, well, how passionately, how important is this particular call in terms of what our business priorities are and my own personal priorities, and where does that fit in? I think, you just have to take each one on the value of that, but you can't just say yes to everything. That's a recipe for burnout, without question.
And so obviously, like you've got your family, but you don't necessarily have kids. How do you think that that's maybe shaped your career, or do you think it's had an impact on your career at all?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I'm conscious that I am able to put in more time and effort, perhaps, than particularly mums like yourself with young kids. I watch my sister work full time and bring up to littlies and homeschool for the last year, which is just, I don't know how she's coped. I don't know how all the homeschooling mums have managed. I think for me, my husband once said to me, "You'd come home earlier if we had kids."
Maybe not.
And I'm like, well, he's kind of right. Like, I need to pay attention to my relationship with my husband as much as I would as if we had kids. I can't abandon him, just like mums can't abandon kids, or parents can't abandon kids. So I think it still plays a role in, it should play a role in what I do and don't do. And it's why we take our sabbaticals together. It's why we try and spend as much time together as we can, because we're fortunate. I'm sure it's much easier for us to organise to go on sabbaticals when we don't have children, because it's a whole nother level of complexity. But I would say there's loads of blog posts, TED Talks out there of people with kids who have done it, and not and on a shoestring by all accounts. So I think it would be unfair to say, it's all right for you, you can do that, you don't have kids. I think, if you're interested in having creative sabbaticals and you've got a family, go and look at the resources out there, because there's some pretty exciting stuff about what people are doing with them.
Yeah, no, I have to say I agree with you. I left Sydney after we'd met. So we'd met, I knew for a couple of years down there, and I left. I'd had a bit of a burnout situation, and I left, and then I went and happened to find my husband when I was having that. So for me, it was a bit of a forced sabbatical. I hadn't planned for it. I hadn't saved up, but I figured out a way to make it work. And that was obviously all pre-husband and pre-kids. But it's something that he and I talk about all the time. He's actually taking his creative sabbatical at the moment, where he's partially part-time dad, but like stay-at-home dad. But we do have help who helps to look after the children. So he has a lot of time to indulge in the things that he's enjoying. And we've always talked that we will swap again. So I'm thinking maybe another 2 to 3 years, and I might be ready for my turn. So yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely doable, and I think you definitely need to do it.
Yeah, for sure. And it doesn't have to be a year or 6 months. Like, sometimes it's just a period of time that's long enough for you to take a headspace change, a mental break, to calibrate what's important for you in your life and in your career, and have enough time to let the pressures and energy kind of find your equilibrium again. It's so important. I think, to me, one of the things we talked about earlier was, how to define success. And I think that for me has changed over the years. In my early career, it was always sort of I think success is what people would look at me and see and think, oh, that means success. Like, I don't know, working for a particular organization with a tier 1 brand or a good brand reputation, or, it's having more responsibility or accountability for managing jobs, or, having a role or a particular title. But now I look back at it and I think actually success has to be more three-dimensional. You can't just evaluate your success of your career in isolation from the success of your family and home life and your own creative health and well-being. Even I think it has to be a three-dimensional whole, doesn't it? So if I've got a job that looks like a successful job, but I am neglecting everything else in my life, I think I could argue that's not the definition of success. I think it's to find both. Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've come to learn that myself. It's about then how you manage that and make sure that each of those, whether it's the tripod of stability or it's all of your cups being full, whichever way you kind of want to look at it. So
yeah.
and
it's going to change over your life too. Like what's important in different stages of life is going to change. So that's probably another thing, is that how you look at success. I think that it's really important that you let that evolve as we do, as you grow and learn.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And just to wrap up, one last question I would like to know is, for future topics, what are some topics around women in the workforce and our work life? What are some topics that you would like to hear more about?
I would be really curious to know about what it's like for those women who are like on a board and they're the only female voice in the room. Like, do women feel like they have to speak and think and operate in a more masculine way to be taken seriously? Do they not think about it and just, it just ends up like that? It'd be a really interesting conversation to be women on boards. What does that look like currently, well, certainly in Australia, a male-dominated role? I think that could be quite interesting. And are they parents? Do they have families? Is it statistically look like, mums who have had to stop working for a chunk of time while they're looking after the kids and then re-enter the workforce with I don't know, let's call it a 5-8 year gap? Do they feel that by the time they get to the boardroom? Not sure.
Yeah, no, definitely. That would be something very, very interesting to kind of understand. Well, anyway, thank you very much for your time, Carol. It's been absolute pleasure speaking with you. Found out so much about taking creative sabbaticals and about kind of taking those breaks every 4 or 5 years, and I think that's incredibly useful and incredibly helpful, particularly for people who are thinking that they would like to work in that kind of manner. I know that my husband and I have talked about it, and I've heard about it being called mini retirements by other people. So I definitely think that it'd be very, very helpful for a lot of people out there wanting to consider the same. Well, thank you very much for your time. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I don't look at it as a mini retirement. That sort of suggests that you're not really going to do anything. Whereas the creative sabbatical for me is about learning and experimenting and trying new things, new experiences. And, it's still part of the evolution of who you are.
Yeah, just another chapter then, hey?
Yeah. Actually, there's a really good TED talk by Stephen Sagemeister, I think his name is. And he talks about taking a creative sabbatical. He does it every 7 years. He takes 1 year off. And he says that think about it as reaching into your retirement, grabbing 5 years and interspersing it in amongst your work life. Brilliant.
That's exactly I think I saw that recently, actually. We'll put a link to it, definitely.
Yeah, do. That's good. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Well,
Cool.
thank you very much for your time. And please, well, of course, you're going to go and enjoy your sabbatical, but please check in with us we'll try and check in maybe in a year's time and just sort of see
Sure.
how the year's gone for you and where you're at and any other words of wisdom.
Sure, no problem. I look forward to it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks so much for joining us on Women Who Lead. Visit my website, jesscarr.com, where you can find other podcasts and link to information about Women Who Lead. If you found value in this show, please share it with your friends and let me know if there's anyone you would like to see on the show or topics you would like to see more of. Be sure to tune in for our next episode. I'm Jess Carr. Bye for now.